Eddie, during the war? And I answered him, son, what week are you talking about during the war? I was in the Army 3 years. What week are you talking about? And what day? Also, in the day, what time are you talking about? Are you talking about 4 a.m. in the morning when we started fighting? Or are you talking about 5 p.m. when we had to count how many casualties we had and quit, particularly if the Germans stopped? So it's impossible for me to tell you or describe what it's like if you look at a man and see his arm blown off and picked up and put into an ambulance. I can't tell you that, but I could just give you other things during the war. But what it's like in combat, no one can tell you.
First thing we want to do is if you would, just tell us your full name,
Okay.
place of birth, and date of birth.
My full name is Robert Louis, Louis, Ernst, Ernst. I was born and brought up in Manhattan, New York City, right in the middle. Down here in Georgia, I'm a Yankee. October 28th, 1911. I'm 87. I'll be 88 in 2 months.
So when did you move down to the Atlanta area?
When did I what?
When did you move to the Atlanta area?
5 years ago.
5 years ago.
And the only reason we moved, that practically all our friends either died or went to Florida. So we went down here, and especially we have 2 children and 2 grandchildren living in Atlanta, and we love Atlanta very much.
Now, what age were you? Did you get drafted? Did you volunteer?
I volunteered, if I could, to get into the ski troops because I was a skier since 1936. Now the ski troops, which is the 10th Division, has the highest IQ of any Army division there is, including Marines or Navy, only because all the skiers came from colleges, or they were ski instructors. Like Walter Prager was a ski instructor of Dartmouth, and many of the ski instructors from Europe, particularly Switzerland, came over here, and they enlisted in the 10th Division. And we had the beginning of it. We had to have men enlist who were skiers. At the beginning, we were called the 10th Mountain Light Division because we didn't have enough skiers at that time for a heavy one. We only had at that time about 8,000. But it got more and more, and we finally got up to 14,000 men in the division. That included mule skinners. We had mules in the snow where we trained in Camp Hale, Colorado, at 9,000 feet up to 14,000 feet. So only mules could get up there. Little cars could only go a certain amount up the hills, and the mules took the rest. We also had dogs. We had 500 mules and 60 dogs, and the dogs sometimes took light provisions up in the snow. And that was the way the 10th Division prospered.
Now, what year did you enlist?
1943. Early 1943.
Hold on just a second. You were telling us you enlisted in 1943.
Yes.
What prompted your enlistment at that point?
Well, as I say, there's a right way or wrong way in the Army way. See, when I enlisted, I said I want to go to the ski troops, and when I went to the sergeant looked at me as if I was nuts, crazy. Infantry, you're nuts. So as a result, I was sent to quartermaster in Camp Lee, Virginia for basic training. So when I got through with basic training, I went to OCS in quartermaster. But the day before I was to appear, I was called in front of a sergeant, a colonel rather, with 4 other enlisted men who was due to be in the OCS, a quartermaster. And the colonel says, "How would you like to go to OCS in chemical warfare?" And the 4 of us says, "No, thank you. We want well, what we wanted here, quartermaster." He says, "Well, a truck will pick you up in 1 hour and send you over to Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland, and you will go to OCS in chemical warfare." That's the Army, see? So we went. So after I graduated from OCS, we went down to Herbert Smart Air Base in Georgia. And when I was down there, we were given a leave of absence. So when I went home, one day I was walking on Broadway on 48th Street, and I met a man who was a skier. He was in his 40s, so he wasn't in the Army. And he was an old friend of mine. He says, "What in the world are you doing here?" I said to him, "I wanted to go into the ski troops, but I can't get in." He says, "I'm one of the men who are getting the men into the ski troops at Camp Hale, Colorado. What's your number and where are you?" I told him where I was in Herbert Smart Air Base. "When you get down there, when will you be there?" "In 2 days. In 2 days, when you get down there, you'll be transferred to the 10th Division. "Oh, okay, thank you very much." And I said to myself, "Yeah, sure. You're full of." I got down there at 6 o'clock in the morning at Camp Lee, Virginia, because I had to be there by 7. Otherwise, I would AWOL. And when I checked in, the man says, "You got a big envelope here. Let me have it." It was from the War Department. Opened it up. "You were hereby transferred to the ski troops at Camp Hale, Colorado." I says, "Check me out." He says, "What are you, crazy? You're going to go to infantry?" I says, "Yeah, I'm going to go to infantry." "Well, okay, go out." So I got a hitch into Macon, into the railroad station. At the railroad station, I said, I have to go to Denver, Colorado. How do I get there?" He says, "Well, we don't have a train until tomorrow for you to get on." I says, "I'm sure you've got some trains with troops on them, troop trains." He says, "Yes, one is coming through in about 10 minutes. So I took out a $5 bill from my wallet, and I says, "I'll bet you any amount of money that you can't stop that train so I can hop on." He took the $5, he went out, he put the flag down, and when the train came in 9 minutes after, it stopped, and the operator of the railroad, of the engineer, says, "What's the matter?" He says, "Do you need any water?" He says, "No. Stop stopping me." Okay, in the meantime, I got on. And it was a troop train, and they were all asleep by that time. Anyhow, the train was Eastern Illinois, and it went to Chicago. So I got off at Chicago. I went to the train. He says, "Yeah, there's a train going to Denver tonight, a night train." Fine. I bought a ticket, went on the train, but you can't have a sleeper. There's no sleeper. It's all filled with troops. When I got on, I did the same thing with another $5 bill. And about 10 minutes later, I was in bed. I got on the train at Denver, Colorado, and I went on Denver Rio Grande Railroad that went up to the mountains to Pando, which is near Leadville, and to the camp. I got on the train. It was a freight train of 10 freight cars and 1 passenger car. And in the passenger car were 50 nurses returning to Camp Hale, and me. I'll never forget that. That was a joyful ride into Camp Hale.
I bet.
Now,
When you left OCS, what rank were you?
first, you're always a second lieutenant.
Second lieutenant.
Yeah, second lieutenant.
Okay. Now, when you got out to Colorado, did you retrain for mountain warfare?
Very, very much. And these will tell you in here what it was. I thought that I could ski after skiing in Vermont and New Hampshire. Huh. That was solid color skiing in New England, but not in Colorado. 112 inches of snow. You don't ski like you do in the East. So I'll tell you something a little funny. I started out the first day with a group from division headquarters, and there were about 7 men. And the man in charge his name was Lemon from Dartmouth ski team. And we had a ski lift, a T-bar. That was the thing then, a T-bar lift, which is one of the longest T-bars in the United States. And I went up the hill, and Lemon says, Ernst, you go anchor, you're last. I said to myself, oh, sure. I mean, after all, I'm great. So we 7 of us started down the hill, and in the East, you always lean forward on your skis. I leaned forward, and I went down into the snow, and I couldn't find my skis after a while. They were so deep in the snow, and all of a sudden, the 6 men ahead of me made a direct right turn, went back to the lift. I, when tried to make a turn like I would in New England, I fell flat on my body, on my face, deep in the snow. My rifle that was on my shoulder hit me on the head, hit more off my helmet, and I went deep. In the meantime, the other 6 went up, came down, and as they approached me, they all sluiced and put snow all over me. And Lemon said to me, Ernst, are you still cocky? I said, no. Get me out of here and show me how to ski. So from then on, I was taught. It took me a month to learn how to ski in deep snow. Entirely different.
What other type of training did they teach you?
Oh, first place, they teach you how to shoot a rifle on your stomach with your skis in back flat.
Wow.
You don't crouch. You go, your skis in the back, and you shoot with your rifle. And that goes for the mud as well if you don't have skis on, which we did. And also, the altitude, up to 13,000, we had a lot of men who had to get out, unfortunately. And most of them cried when they had to get out. They turned blue. And we couldn't have it because we felt we didn't know where we were going to fight. And if you turn blue, you're a casualty immediately just because you're in high altitude. But a small number did. As far as percentage-wise, a small number only turned blue. Most of us had been in the mountains, and because we had skied before, so that we could take the altitude.
So most of the men that were in the 10th Division already had skiing experience then?
Almost all. If not, they had cross-country skiing, if not downhill skiing, and they had mountain climbing. But they were men who enlisted who were mountain climbers or skiers. Now after that, we had to get soldiers to fill up the 10th Division to the full 14,000. And we had to teach them how to ski. So we had schools all the time. And even like me, I didn't know how to ski in deep snow. They didn't either, even if there was Dartmouth or Seattle.
Did you end up teaching any of those classes?
Doing what?
Did you end up teaching or training any of in those classes to help any other people when they came to it?
Yes. Yeah, after a while I did. Yes.
Was there any, besides the skis, which is obvious, as far as equipage, was the 10th issued special equipage for the Arctic conditions?
Oh, sure. we had special clothing and snow pants, snow trousers, and of course our jackets, snow jackets, and we always had in the back, what do you call it, over your head?
Hood?
Huh?
Hood?
Hoods over your head, for the because it snowed a lot, and goggles we had, and heavy underwear. Always heavy underwear all the time.
As far as weapons, were you carrying M1s?
M1s.
Okay. Now, when you were training in Colorado, what was the rumor? Where did you think that the 10th would be deployed? Because it was a unique unit.
Well, we never knew. We never knew in advance what was. There was a talk about our invading Norway and killing the Germans in Norway, but we didn't have enough men. This is what I deduced in division headquarters. We didn't have enough men. 14,000 men in Norway is nothing, because Norway is pretty big, and the Germans had many more than 14,000. So we waited until we were sent over to Italy, and they found out that the Germans in the mountains of Italy had armament, artillery, that they fired down from the mountains into the valleys, and it was difficult for the American and the British and any others to go in the valleys of Italy when the Germans were on the mountaintops shooting down. And we couldn't, you can't shoot up as well as you can shoot down. So that's why the 10th Mountain was the one and only equipped to go into the mountains of Italy on skis, because we, at 10th Division, went in January. Early January we fought. They actually got there in late December. Now,
that's December of
44.
Right.
And into battle January 5th of 45. I personally have had an unusual thing. I was in 2 theaters of operation. Why? Because having been going through OCS at chemical warfare while I was with the 10th Division, a letter was sent from Edgewood Arsenal headquarters saying they want 25 men who graduated OCS to come back and take a special course in a 4.2 mortar. It's 4.2 chemical mortar. You ever hear of a 4.2 chemical mortar? I have a picture of it. It's equal, 4.2 is equal to 105 millimeters. Now 155 is the biggest gun there was. 105 is pretty big too, but we do it by hand.
So what was the, when you say it was a chemical mortar, what was the chemical that?
Well, the chemical that originated in there, of course, was mustard gas. Okay. And more important, because we didn't at that time use gas at all, smoke. And if you can fire a smoke screen in front of the advancing troops, that was very important. But the biggest was explosive shells, which they made. Now a 4.2 mortar is the one and only mortar that has a rifled barrel. And a rifled barrel made the shell circle like a football. When a football is thrown on a pass, it's thrown around to go into the hands. The shell did the same, and it was so accurate. Other mortars sometimes flipped over, and when it does, it's not that accurate. It prevents it from going too far. But a 4.2 mortar used to have only chemicals, but it was then made into high explosive in it, and that's what we had. So I came back to the 10th Division, and just before we would go to Camp Swift, Texas, for certain hot training. The 25 of us who took that course were sent over to England to form 4.2 mortar battalions. And I was terribly disappointed because I went over early. I went over in November to England, and from there, they were formed battalions, 4.2 mortar battalions, and we went from there to France, through France, and into Germany. And
So this was in...
while we were there, I got in touch with my colonel who was in charge of enlistments and that of the 10th Division, who was in Italy. Now, going from one country to another, you know, sounds impossible, but these countries are no bigger than states in the United States. I mean, Texas happens to be bigger than Germany. So just to go from Texas over to Oklahoma, when I got in touch with them, the man who took my job in division headquarters in the chemical warfare office got killed the first week they went over there. He stepped on a German shell in the soil. What do you call it? A mine, a shoe mine. It's called a shoe mine, and he was blown apart. So he was able, just by luck, the colonel was able, just by luck, to get in touch with me and says, "Come on over right away." So I got on a truck. There's, you know, trucks going in and out. I got there in 2 days, and then fought with the 10th Division. But we fought January and February, and in March, no, it was late February, I was called back to the 4.2 Mortar Battalion to back up Patton's tankers, and he wanted backup in it because Patton, went fast, and boy, he went hard and heavy, and he wanted someone with mortars, which we had in trailers, in jeeps and trailers, so that we could follow him. The other mortars was by hand carted, but we had these jeeps and trailers, so we followed him. And if they got into trouble, he would continue way off, and we would fire and kill them. So I can tell you stories of both Italy and in Germany.
Why don't you tell us about Italy first?
I will, that's right.
Well, and then I'd like to, after you tell about Europe, I'd kind of like to hear your comparison of the two theaters.
Well, in the mountains of Italy, we had, of course, very good food given to us by trucks, and then by trucks they would come by jeep, then by jeep it came up by mule. And when we finished our meals in metal plates, whatever we had left, we put in a garbage can. And Italian boys would stand by the garbage can, and when we were all done and finished giving out the food from our plates, they took the cans and they poured it from the cans into big bags, plastic bags, and brought it down below. And they fed the people of that village with what was left. The food was good. It was just mixed up: meat, potatoes, spaghetti, and a lot of Spam.
Spam was issued a lot?
A lot. I happen to love Spam because I love ham. But we had Spam a lot. Bob Dole was in our outfit. He never trained, he never skied, he never trained in the United States in the 10th Mountain Division. He went to OCS. he was not a skier, but he was a second lieutenant. And 2 weeks before the war ended, Bob Dole was in charge of a group that went to combat to take over a hill occupied by the Germans. And he was in a hole, see, and a German armament hit him in the back on his right arm, and he was knocked unconscious, and he slumped down in the hole. And 2 medical men crawled on their stomachs to try to pull him out. The 2 men were killed. So they left him in there. They didn't want to, while they were fighting. And I think it took, from what I heard, 8 hours before the American troops there were able to kill off enough Germans where they retreated off the hill, upon which then the medics came and pulled Bob Dole out of the hole and brought him down into Florence to a hospital. Now, Bob Dole was told he'd had to have his arm taken off, but he said no. And for 3 years, Bob Dole went in and out of hospitals before he kept his arm. As you see him now, he has a pencil or a pen in his hand, and he can't use his arms too well. He can't shake hands. He uses his left hand.
Now, do you ever recall meeting him or anything?
No.
No.
I met him in Atlanta when he was running for president.
Oh, really?
Yep. And I and another man in Atlanta went to him. We shook hands and we met Bob Dole after he gave his speech. Very personable man, a wonderful man. And he speaks very well.
Now, you were attached to headquarters.
Yeah.
And so what was your daily duty? I mean, I know you said that it varied
Well,
from day to day and time to time, but generally speaking, what was your responsibility?
Ernst, go out there to this regiment. I understand they need some ammunition, but we're not sure what type or how much and so forth. And the telephones are down, so go out there. I couldn't look for shoe mines, impossible. Just run out, find out what they needed. Do this and do that. At that time I was 34 years old, the youngest in the division headquarters. They were all older. And this is what I did. As far as a lot of other things, I mean, on foot.
Yeah, so you just, because you were the youngest, they sent you on a lot of these.
Not only that, but I was only, at that time, first lieutenant, eventually made a captain, but that time first lieutenant, and I did things like that. Let me tell you. Oh, go ahead.
When let's see see. You were saying that like division headquarters, would it generally be set up in the field? Was it in tonnage, or was it a vacated building, or?
Well, we tried very hard to find a building so that our telephones could work because the regiments were separated at different places, spread out. So we were always in back of the regiments. And of course, the Germans always tried to bomb the regimental headquarters. That was a wonderful thing. But we were far enough back where it was make it difficult for them to reach us.
Now, who was the 10th Division commander?
General Hayes.
General Hayes. And who did he report to next up the chain?
He was what?
Who did he report to next up the chain of command?
Yeah.
No, who was above him?
Well, the whole General Clark.
Okay, Clark. So he reported
General
directly,
Clark, oh sure.
directly to Clark.
Clark did the ordering
Okay.
of when and so forth, because after the mountains came the plains, and then they went into the plains all the way up to the Brenner Pass. And right, luckily for us, at the beginning of the Brenner Pass, which is at the end of Lake Garda, that's a tough thing to go up to the Brenner Pass, because the Germans could defend the Brenner Pass easy, but the war ended.
Now, when we're talking about the Germans, what was your assessment of them as far as fighters? Were they...
They thought they were so great, but they weren't that great. They thought they were the best in the world, and that the Americans were stupid and not so good, but they learned differently. But they always remained cocky. In fact, after the war was over, I caught some men, and I asked for their guns, and a German Nazi lieutenant, or we call him a lieutenant, Oberlieutenant, gave me his gun and then spit on my face, whereupon I took the butt of my rifle and put it in his mouth. He's got some teeth still missing. That's the Germans. I got another story here about Germans.
Well, go ahead.
On our way, it was cute. We were on our road on Jeep and trailer at night, and I happened to see a man standing on the side of the road. And I said, wait a minute, stop a minute. I looked at him, and he was English, an English major. I says, come here. He says, I said, where are you from? I just escaped from a German POW camp. I said, get in. We're going to the nearest town, and I'll let you out. Oh, my God, that's wonderful. So we got in the Jeep. I says, are you hungry? He says, oh, am I? I said, well, what would you like? He says, Scotch whiskey. Well, we happened to have a flask underneath the seat, and we gave him the Scotch whiskey, and when I let him out, he was half potted. But he was so glad to get out. And
as far as your interaction with the Brits, with the British and the English, did you how was that relationship?
English and British?
Yeah, with the Americans.
Very good.
Very good.
Very good. We even had a Scottish brigade, and before they attack, they would have the trumpet. What do you call it?
Bagpipe.
Bagpipes. They blow the bagpipes. When they blew the bagpipes, the Germans knew where the hell they were, and they would bomb them. In 10 seconds, they'd bomb them. So I had to go over to them, tell them, don't use any bagpipes whatsoever. Don't tell them where you are. Okay.
And when was that? When did that happen?
I don't know. During the war. What day?
On this sheet, you said you first saw combat in Germany.
Yeah, now I'm going to Germany.
And that's when you were with the Mortar Battalion.
Right. Now, when I was with the Mortar Battalion, we were going behind Patton's tankers, and I got worried that you're going to come to a concentration camp about a mile away, get in there, and give them all the food that you have in your trailers or in your Jeeps, but only take 10 minutes, because we need you. I said, well, where is the concentration camp? You'll smell it. I went a mile further, and boy, did we smell it. And we went into the concentration camp. And the men, the Germans were just fired out of it by Patton's tankers. So the concentration had no Germans in it. They fled, They were later caught and killed. Yeah. I went in there and the Germans came all bashing out, and we took all our food and we dumped it. But the meat was Spam in cans. And so when they picked up when the concentration men picked up the cans, they tried to open them by pulling the thing out, and they couldn't do it. They were so weak. They couldn't open up the Spam to get food. And I yelled to my men, open up all the Spam cans quickly. We got only now 5 minutes. So all of us took the cans of Spam and just pulled them out and threw them on the ground, you know, so that we got all the cans open up, because they were so weak they couldn't open up this can of Spam.
Now, when you got to this concentration camp, is that the first time that you had run across one?
Yes.
Had you heard rumors of them before
Oh,
this?
God, of course. And they weren't rumors, they were truth.
Sure.
Not rumors. Small concentration camps all over. You hear of Auschwitz, but there were small ones all over. And they were just as cruel. And the men, you could smell the camp. And they were terrible clothing, and they were thin as could be.
When you were in Germany, did you guys receive lots of information every day about like how the other theaters were doing and what was going on in
No.
other countries? You barely found out.
No, we didn't. We were too occupied to find out. Now, as far as Germany, I was in an observation post. See, in an OP it's called, an observation post, where I guided our 4.2 mortars as to where to shoot, where to fire, what range to fire, and what direction to fire. And while I was up there, the Germans found me from a distance and fired their 88. And the 88 just hit about 10 yards away from my head, as you can see here. Luckily, I was lower down in my hole, and the shrapnel went over my head, but the percussion of it hit my ear. And all of a sudden, I look up, I can't hear a thing. I was stone deaf. So I said to my radio man, radio in to get my fellow officer up here. I'm going back because I can't hear. I went back and I went into a MASH unit. And the MASH unit was just like you see on television. And they said, examined my ear and so forth, and they said, well, luckily your eardrum is damaged, but it's not broken. Stay in MASH here, and if it doesn't clear up, heal up, I'm going to send you to a hospital. In 3 days it healed and I was able to hear, and I went back to my unit. That's how I got my Purple Heart. And I didn't think anything of the Purple Heart until I got out of the Army, when I found out a Purple Heart was equal to 5 points of getting out. And the point system meant a great deal. You have a certain amount of points to get out. If you don't, you stay in the Army. And that Purple Heart got me out. But I also had a second Purple Heart. In training in the United States, at Herbert Smart Air Base, we had to train to put canisters of mustard gas up into an airplane so that the airplane could take off and release the mustard gas. Well, I did it to put it up, not knowing there was a slight leak in the tank, and it fell on the back of my leg. And I looked back, and the man, my officers in charge, pulled my pants down and sent me to the hospital. But luckily, it just had a scar, which I can show you, and it's still on after 55 years. And I got a Purple Heart for that. I didn't deserve it. 5 points more. Oh, going along the drive during the day, we went with the mortars. We suddenly got rifle fire from the side of the road from a factory, and the bullets were going all over. It wasn't going so correctly, and I stopped. I said, "Out!" And we all jumped out on the other side of the road. And I says, get around. So half of us went one way, half the other way. We went in back of the factory. I went quietly up the steps into the door. We could still hear the firing. The Nazis were still firing. Burst open the door, and we crammed through it with our rifles. And the men turned around. I looked at them. They dropped their rifles. There were 6 Nazis. I says, "How old?" I said to the sergeants who spoke German, "How old are they?" 13 years old. When the German army fled with the American army in front of them, they gave their uniforms and guns to these 13-year-old boys who lived in back of the factory in the rear, in the forest there. So I said, "Tell them to take their pants down." So they took their pants off. Now tell them to take their shoes and socks off. Shoes and socks. I says, "Now tell them to take their unterhosen down." Well, they got scared stiff. They thought we were going to shoot them. I says, "Now tell them to go home and never to come back again with a rifle." Amazing, they didn't believe it. They crammed through the door. We saw them, and we laughed like the dickens to see them. You know what was flopping in the wind as they each went to their house. You imagine when the mothers saw them coming in the door. It was funny as could be. Then the sergeant says, "Lieutenant, we're in a cigar factory." He says, "This is the Prince Albert cigar factory. Make the finest cigars in Germany." He says, "Can we get some?" I said, "Sure, take boxes quickly and get out of here." So each one of us took a box. We went back to our vehicles, to our Jeeps. We got in, and then each one I can see opened up the cigar and put a cigar in the mouth. By that time, it was 6:30 p.m. and dark. So I said to Sergeant, says to me, "Lieutenant, here's a cigar." I said, "I never smoked in my life." He says, "Oh, you got to smoke a cigar. Try it." All right, everyone else was smoking a cigar. I'll smoke one. I put a cigar in my mouth. I lit it up, and about 5 minutes later, I get a call. "What in the world are you men doing with your headlights on your Jeeps?" I looked back, and I can see the 12 cigars lit, and all of a sudden, I hear an airplane above me. I look up, it's a German plane, and I yelled out, "Throw your cigars to the right. Get it out of the way, quickly." We all threw it, and we jumped. We went with our Jeeps as fast as we could. At that time, it was about 50 miles an hour away, and luckily we didn't get bombed because the cigars were there, and from the airplane they were bombing the cigars. So that's the first and last time I ever smoked in my life.
Now, where were you when the Germans surrendered?
When the war ended, we were in Bavaria, near the Czechoslovakia border. We were near there. We went through towns, and we'd sleep in houses, apartment houses. And I went into one apartment house with, about 12 of us. And it was a woman there. I guess her husband was killed. And she was saying, she spoke English, "Oh, we hate Hitler. We hate Hitler. I hate Hitler. We don't go for Hitler. We're so glad you're here." So I went through a drawer and opened up the drawers of a bureau. And at the bottom of her clothing was a big photo of Hitler. They never liked Hitler when the Americans came. This is what they were.
Now,
Oh, well, one more.
were you still in Europe when you heard that Japan had surrendered?
No. I was home.
You were already home.
Oh, sure.
Oh,
The
wow.
end of the war, we were home, ready to go to the mountains of Japan when the war ended. See, we were all given 30 days leave when we got back to the United States. Here's a story. My brother had gone into the war ahead of me. He had a low draft number. And I hadn't heard from my brother in 2 years, because when you wrote where you were, it was crossed out. You're not allowed to tell you where you were because it may be found in the Germans or Japanese. So I didn't know where he was. 2 weeks before the war ended, in Germany, I went in a Jeep to get some ammunition sent to us. And on the road, before then, my mother had written me the day before. I just heard from my brother Alan. He's with something called, and she didn't know, 442 FA. That's field artillery. I'm going along the road, and there's a truck in front of me, and my God, it says on the back of the truck, 442 FA. So I says, "Come on, stop the truck." We did, and I says, "Where are you?" He says, "Well, just a mile down the road on top of that hill." And I could hear the noise. He was with, he says, I said, "Do you know my brother, Alan Ernst?" "Sure, he's our medic. He's right here." I said, "I haven't seen him in 2 years. Follow me, I'll take you to him." So I followed him along the road. We went out of the road, up into the mountain, and stopped at the bottom of the hill. And he yelled out, "Medic, medic." My brother came rolling down the hill. He was fat. And he had this medical chest around his bosom, around his waist. So he rolled down, and he had on a helmet too. And I had my head down. And he says, "What's the matter?" So I put my hand out. So he looked at my hand, and he says, "I don't see it." Oh, my God. We hugged and kissed. And 5 minutes later, medic, up the hill. Then we parted. After the war was over, I was able to go back there and see him again for another day, and then I didn't see him again for months. He went and I went. We were lucky to be alive.
Both of you lived.
Both of you. Lucky. That's all I can tell you. Pure luck.
This was a question we should have asked at the beginning, but I forgot. And where were you when you heard that Pearl Harbor had been attacked and the United States was going to get involved?
In New York, in New York City, on leave. That the war was that Japan had quit.
No.
And then I went back to my outfit.
Okay.
I went back to my outfit.
No, I was saying when you heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor.
When you heard it, it was in August.
No, when the Japanese had attacked.
Oh, in Pearl Harbor. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I was working in New York.
Okay. I had another question about equipage. When you were both in Germany and in Italy, and you were a lieutenant and then later a captain, what did you carry as a personal weapon?
Same thing.
You carried a
Well,
knife?
wait a minute. Oh, that's another story. Patton says there's the Walther pistol factory right near you. Get your battalion, this was with the mortar battalion, and get in there and take over the pistol factory. So we went into the pistol factory, and it was just lunchtime. And a lot of them were eating lunch, others were out, and we took over. It was easy to take over the whole factory. And when we did, Patton sent a major and a colonel in a jeep to the factory and says General Patton would like to have a pearl handle pistol. So I went across the street where the men who worked in the factory were Polish, and they were slaves. And you may have read in the paper recently that they're paying those men who worked in factories and never got paid. And I got the manager of the factory over, and I says, have you got a pearl handle pistol? My sergeant could speak German, which they understood. And he says, no, we don't have pistols, but we have these pistols. And he showed us a sterling silver pistol. And the sergeant says, oh, that's wonderful. So I said to the manager, put together a pistols for General Patton. So he put together a pistol, and I says, now give it to this man, the manager, and they had a shooting gallery downstairs in the cellar. And I says, let him shoot this pistol. In the meantime, we aimed our rifles at the manager, 6 of us. I didn't want him to turn around and shoot us. I didn't trust anybody. So he shot the pistol, made sure that, if we give it to General Patton, that it worked, and that it wouldn't explode in his face or his hand. So when the men left for Patton, my sergeant says, what about us? I says, hey, that's a great idea. I said to the manager, give us 6 pistols. And they gave us each pistols and ammunition, and we took it home. I declared mine out, when I got home. But they're beautiful, gorgeous pistols, sterling silver casing, and engraved.
What happened to it?
Well, what happened to it is that at that time they said no pistols are allowed. So I took it into a store and had it made insecure.
But you still have it?
No, I don't have any more. No, it's insecure. Now I have one more story. All right, one more took over 7. That's it. After the war was over, I went in a Jeep. For some reason, I've forgotten what reason, was to do something probably when they were getting out of here. But it was 2 weeks exactly after the Germans surrendered. And I went, this was way up in the mountains of Bavaria. And while we were traveling on the road, I noticed something moving in the bushes on the side of the road. And I said, stop. And I looked, And we got out. We went in there, and it was a Nazi soldier. So we went up to him with our rifles and took away, he had a pistol, and he had a razor for shaving. So we took that. And I says, "What are you doing here?" And he told my sergeant, who understood German, "I escaped from a Russian prison camp." He said, "It was horrible." And he says, "I've been doing nothing but walking at night only." I says, "Where do you live?" He says, "I live about 100 yards away." "Where?" He says, "Down that hill on a farm. My wife and child are there." I said, "All right, get in the Jeep, and if you're lying, I'm going to take you back to the POW camp." We went up the hill. I looked down in the valley, and there was a beautiful farmhouse and a magnificent farm. We went down, I can still see that road, down the road to the farmhouse, whereupon a woman dashed out of the farmhouse with a little baby in her arms. And the Nazi soldier jumped out of the car and hugged and kissed her and the baby. And they talked and this, and I just stood there watching them. When they got done, he looked at me, and I went over to the soldier, and I grabbed him by his jacket, and I put my face 6 inches from his face, and I says, "Ich bin a Yid." That means, "I am a Jew." Whereupon the wife screamed and turned around, ran with the baby in her arms into the farmhouse. The soldier, Nazi, turned absolutely white, and I had to practically hold him up from falling down. And I stood there holding him for about 10 seconds, after which I let go, and I said to the sergeant, "Let's get out of here." I got into the Jeep. I went up that hill, I can still see. At the top of that hill, I said, "Stop." I turned around, and there was that soldier, petrified, standing there, just looking up the hill at me with his mouth wide open. He couldn't believe I didn't kill him. He will never, as long as he lives, I'm sure, never forget that incident.
Great story. Now, what did you do when you got home? When you got home, did you go, what did you go?
Well, I was married.
Yeah.
And of course, I visited, my brother got home then too, nearby, luckily, and I was able, in 30 days, we were to get together, my mother and father, and so forth. We visited the relatives.
Nope. Did you go back into the same line of work you had been in before the war?
Yeah, oh God. None of this. I'll tell you another story. Yes. No, I didn't. My father-in-law was in the jewelry business, and he had a company, and he wanted me to come in and eventually take over and be the president of it. Well, I went in, and after about a half a year, 6 months, I said, "Dad, this is not for me. I don't like jewelry. I just don't see it. I'm going to go back in the textile business where I was." And I went back into a big firm, textile firm, and from there on I went into my own textile company with 2 other partners. And for the rest of the year, which was 14 years in the textile business, at which time, at the end of which time, I was able to retire.
So
14 years. For 14 years, we made money, a profit.
now, we've asked everybody else this. What did you do with your GI Bill?
I used the GI Bill to take a business administration course for nothing. It was very good. Also, which is even more important, I bought a house in Scarsdale, New York, and I got what they call a GI mortgage, 4.5%. A GI mortgage, 30-year GI mortgage.
Very good.
Yep.